Historically, Cornell has been a campus in which protests have always been a common feature of campus life. But more recently, there's been, I believe, an apoliticization of so many of the students. And I think what the post-October 7th moment has done, it has reinvigorated so many people to be involved as well. And I think the other stuff I won't say because I'm being recorded. So people have been asking me, if I was to characterize what happened to me specifically, what word would I use? And I've often said it's unreal. And anti-Semitism becomes the racism of all racisms, right? And it becomes the beyond the pale racism. And, you can't even, anything that remotely resembles anti-Semitism or even the mere claim of an anti-Semitic claim means that you can now be repressed. And it is seen, in my understanding, as the last frontier of Western civilization, right? It's almost as if like if Palestine is liberated or Palestine is free, that signals the terminal crisis of Western civilization's decline.
Welcome to the Floodgate Podcast, a vital space brought to you by the Palestine Chronicle. Here, we delve into today's critical issues, cutting through the noise of mainstream narratives to bring you a deeper understanding of what is taking place in Gaza and the rest of Palestine. I'm your host, Ramzi Baroud. Co-hosting this special podcast with me is my very good friend, Buna Mbaye. Buna is a Pan-African activist, member of the Pan-African League, Umoja, and Pan-African Brigade for Palestine. Buna?
Thank you very much, Ramzi. It's always an honor and pleasure to be on the Floodgate Podcast. So today we have a very, very special guest, Momodou Taal, who is a scholar, activist. He's also the author of a recently published book. It is titled The Malcolm Effect Revisited. He's also a leading organizer in the student movement against the US-funded genocide in Gaza. In fact, and that's very important for the audience, for those who are not necessarily familiar with Momodou, he was one of the students who were harassed, expelled from one of the so-called Ivy League institutions because of his involvement in the anti-genocide campaign in the US, and his impactful activism at Cornell University led to him being threatened, suspended by Cornell University, and also threatened by the US administration, the Trump administration, that threatened to deport him from the US. So he eventually left the US, and he's been giving a lot of interviews, not so many, but some interviews to some of our comrades, and we are very, very glad, very happy to have him here today on the Floodgate Podcast. So Momodou, once again, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome on the Floodgate Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and privilege, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Momodou. Let me just take us back a little bit here. And before we got into this dramatic moment that led to you leaving the US and in doing so, exposing this kind of narrative of American democracy and free speech and all of that. If we could just start a little bit earlier than that, how do you become involved in the Palestine Solidarity movement in the first place, and how this involvement itself became impacted by the ongoing genocide in Gaza at the moment?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I would say my earliest kind of memories of, I guess, my own Palestine solidarity, I would say, is from like maybe 2008. I just remember, and I only know this because I searched Palestine and my name on Facebook, and like 2008, I was putting on my statuses "Free Gaza" and "Free Palestine." So I would have been about 15 at the time. And then again, I think at that time, what animated my attachment to Palestine, I think, was definitely a religious inflection. And as I was growing up and reading more and kind of being exposed to more literature, I guess I was developing an analysis that included religion, but also knew that this is an issue of settler colonial violence as well. But then, fast forward to October the 7th, campuses exploded across the country in the United States. I was at Cornell University. I would say I was suspended, but Buna, I haven't been expelled. Thank God. I haven't been expelled, so I'm grateful. But I would say, yeah, we had a sustained campaign on campus that was a series of escalations that was trying to call our university to account, holding our university to account, in that we're saying that you are complicit in this genocide by your ties to Israel, and we're calling for divestment, and we're calling for the kind of financial dealings and holdings to be exposed, so we can see the length and extent in which these Ivy Leagues are complicit in the devastation and genocide in Gaza. So I'd say, like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, I've been a front-facing activist all my life, because I haven't, because there's been moments. But I think definitely I've had an attachment to Gaza for a very long time, and Palestine for a very long time. And I think since the October moment, so many people are saying it was a watershed moment. And I was under no illusions of liberalism. For me, liberalism always, whenever in time of crisis, always sides with fascism. But I think the contradictions that became so crystallized and sharpened after October the 7th and continue to do so. But yeah, so on campus, I was just involved in rallies, teachings. We had like a coalition that we established on campus. I was involved in the encampments. I was suspended for my involvement in the encampment. I was suspended for my involvement in another protest, which I attended for 5 minutes. And I would say two things: that Cornell, I felt, disproportionately targeted me, because I think they saw me as someone who was quite front facing. And also, I would say that Cornell effectively placed target on my back as well.
If you don't mind, Buna, I will give you the space here in a second, but I'm just trying to understand, and I would like our viewers and listeners to also try to understand the process here.
Hmm.
You speak about the explosion that happened at Cornell, but also at many universities and many streets, and all across the world, and especially in Western capitals. It was a
Hmm.
moment of just anger and rage, that just children are being slaughtered, and innocent women
Hmm.
and men being slaughtered in this large number. So it kind of makes perfect sense of why all emotions came to the fore and people protested in very large numbers. But what mainstream media and their supporters, as mouthpieces for power in the US, try to paint what has actually taken place in American university. No, it wasn't that. There was some sort of a
Hmm.
conspiracy. It was, and
Hmm.
Buna and I are going to elaborate on the issue of anti-Semitism and all of that. But there was something deliberate taking place here, and it had greater and more sinister uh, 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 objectives than simply highlighting that what Israel is doing in Gaza is wrong. Can you just describe to us, when you first decided to take your first action as part of whatever was taking place at the university? What was that process? You were just angry and you just went to a protest. Was there a different type of arrangements and organization taking place prior to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, of course, I think there's always going to be a level of righteous indignation when it comes to what's happening in Palestine. And I think that, we're not people who shy away from channeling our emotions, especially for righteous and just and in the service of justice. But what I would say, it wasn't like I just woke up one day as an angry person. We immediately after October the 7th, we had already began campus-wide protests, because we knew that the response was going to be, I mean, I don't think we anticipated what we're seeing now, but we knew the response was going to be wholly disproportionate into what was going to unfold, and we're seeing that, we're living that day in and day out. But again, the process was, again, initially I was just someone who spoke at rallies, but also I was organizing with the coalition on campus. So immediately after October the 7th, we had formed the coalition, the Cornell, it was CML, Coalition for Mutual Liberation, in which we had started to begin to tie the dots together, that we realized settler colonial violence is not, what happens in Palestine have direct connection to what's happening in the United States as well. And we had various campus groups sign on to our coalition as well. So that was the kind of initial stages. And then after that, we began to talk about divestment. We began to do our research. It was a very, like, I mean, for a campus that's, Cornell has the ironically, historically, Cornell has been a campus in which protests have always been a common feature of campus life. But more recently, there's been, I believe, an apoliticization of so many of the students. And I think what the post October 7th moment has done, it has reinvigorated so many people to be involved as well, especially especially post BLM 2020. There was a phase in which so many folks became radicalized and so many folks became to think about capitalism and imperialism. And then we're seeing what happened with the Israelis and Zionism. This became another instantiation of that politics and that understanding as well. So I'll say, yeah, I became someone that was like quite front facing. I became an organizer on campus. I used to host teachings as well, talk about the history, challenging Zionism and ideological struggle as well. I would often meet with administrators, to talk to admin about what's happened. Kind of like, because the administrators always had a biased view. Yeah, and they always favored the Zionist community over everyone else. So I would often meet with these communities, try to like explain our side as well.
Thank you, Momodou. So I wanted to go back to the statement that you released just before you left the US, which people can find on your Twitter account. It's a very powerful statement that I really encourage all the people who are involved in the solidarity movement with Gaza and the type of sacrifices that it implies to read it. So in that statement, you wrote, and I quote, "It is so real that we live in a world where you get into trouble for saying killing babies is wrong." So my question is, do you think that there has been a kind of underestimation on the part of those who are involved in the solidarity movement with the people of Palestine of the type of backlash that they'll be facing, and also the extent to which Western governments would be willing to defend, to fund, and to support the genocide in Gaza, also repress those who are involved in the solidarity movement?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think so. People have been asking me if I was to characterize what happened to me specifically, what word would I use? And I've often said it's unreal. And I guess maybe there's a part of naivete on my part actually, because I sincerely thought that I anticipated some level of repression. I anticipated a suspension. I anticipated schools coming down, but to mete out this level of repression on their own students and faculty, in which people's livelihoods are being destroyed, their diplomas and degrees are being withheld, people are losing tenure, people are losing jobs, I was banned from teaching. I just have to say it's unreal. And I think I did not anticipate this level of repression in the service of what is clearly a genocide. So I think that's like maybe some naivety on my part as well. But also just to kind of, I guess, kind of push that further, when I say that Palestine crystallizes so many contradictions, because for me, Palestine holds up a mirror to the world and asks, what kind of world do you want to live in? Because for so long, again, it's almost divine providence that what happened October the 7th happened post the Russia military incursion into Ukraine, because we saw all these institutions who call themselves apolitical were having Ukrainian flags. All those countries who say they hate immigrants were welcoming Ukrainians at ease. All these places where say they have no funding were finding the money to offer scholarships for Ukrainians. And you have to ask yourself, and then I think within months, Karim Khan issued an arrest warrant for Putin. So the question becomes, what is different here? What is it? Why is there such a Palestine exception? Right? And I think we are seeing that in real time. And I think what Ahmed Césaire speaks about, the imperial boomerang, we're seeing this, it becomes crystallizing, clear and apparent when we witness this, because we have to ask the question, what is it about Palestine that the whole entire Western world is willing to abandon and evacuate any semblance of liberalism, any sense of universalism. And I guess for me, I mean, I was under no illusions, right? I'm a black man. I'm under no illusions that liberalism was never universal. And I was under no impressions that liberalism was ever universal. But I think there was a somewhat of a, I wouldn't say shocked, but I was a bit like in 2023 and 4 and 5 that we find once again that in time of crisis that liberalism abandons everything and sides with fascism, and that's what we're seeing quite apparent right now. And I think the world in which we've witnessed today, we cannot go back, because you've heard in these halls of power that the ICC and ICJ were not established to prosecute these kinds of people. They were established to prosecute Africans, essentially. Right? So we're seeing every multilateral institution rubbished, ignored, and I just don't know what the world looks like post this moment, if I'm being honest.
Just to follow up on your point, Mahmoud, because you asked a question and you asked it in so many different ways, and it's the same question that many of us have been asking: why Palestine? Why Palestine is different, and why Palestine is the exception? Okay, so number one, we need you to tell us why do you think that Palestine is the exception, but also another issue here said that you said that you might have been too naive to anticipate that they would go to this extent of repression. And I honestly don't think you were naive. I mean, if you were, then we were all naive, because we also understand that there are certain margins of how far, the liberal media and liberal democracies in the West always play this game where, on the one hand, that they are not really fair and balanced and just, but on the other hand, they give you enough to digest, or enough to pretend that indeed there is some element of justice, there is some element of rule of the law, and so forth. So it kind of keeps the majority of people silent about the terrible things that are happening. But now there are no margins. They went fascist mode all the way. So why? Why did they go to this extent to defend Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich, irrelevant characters in the larger scheme of capitalism, and why Palestine remains the exception?
No, it's a brilliant question. I think there's so much literature that has been written on this. For example, Joseph Massad is someone I engage with quite closely, and so many other scholars. But for me, when I think about Palestine, I look at the rhetoric coming from the likes of Smotrich, Ben Gvir, Netanyahu, right? It is seen, in my understanding, as the last frontier of Western civilization, right? It's almost as if like if Palestine is liberated or Palestine is free, that signals the terminal crisis of Western civilization's decline, right? And I really believe it's like, because again, you have to ask yourself, why would all these quote unquote liberals, Biden and others, and I do think Biden is exceptionally Zionist, and he was ideologically committed. I don't think Trump is in the same way. Not to say give anything to Trump, but I think there's a difference there that should be marked. But I do think there is a question to be had about, it's almost seen as the final frontier. We know that America is in decline, right? We know there is a rise of China that cannot be stopped at this moment. And I feel that I feel like the Western world, which is built for me clearly built on white supremacy and built on notions of racial inferiority, and there is an international divide of humanity. I do feel that so many of these Western governments, Western capitals, see it as their yes, there's imperialism, of course, and we'll talk about why, Israel being an outpost, right? Israel being an outpost of US imperialism in West Asia and the Arab Iranian region, for example. And all these things are true materially. But I think fundamentally there is this thing about the two worlds, like there is a sense of Orientalism in this as well. There is a sense of a bifurcation in the world, because again, we all heard the news reporters say, this is not when Ukrainians were fleeing, these are not blonde hair, blue eyes people, right? We all heard that, right? And it's very clear to me that I understand, if you understand how race and racialization works, for me, race and racialization, it is for the production and reproduction of white supremacy. And you see that, and I think Israel for me becomes like the final crystallization, where not to say Jews are technically like white, but they have been conscripted into white supremacy. right? And they've been conscripted into this. And what Israel represents for me in the world is this like last bastion of colonial, of modernity, right? And I think that's what kind of engenders so much fear in so many people. But I mean, again, there's so many other questions that you can answer as well. Like, Israel being close, not close, but Israel being in the region to kind of, keep an eye on Iran, for example. But again, even like, let's say, I hate doing this, but let's say a cost benefit analysis, right? Surely wouldn't it be more sense to prop up these Arab governments than having Israel bring all these Western capitals down and expose their hypocrisy? Like, that's what makes more sense. But the fact that there is, for me, I think there's a broad stroke. So there's some people who are like ideologically invested, like religiously. Some people believe in a greater Israel. You have Christian Zionists all over the US, for example. And then also you have the question of like materially for US interest. And also you have the question of like this clash of civilizations rhetoric as well that comes up constantly.
Yeah, thank you, Momodou. You kind of touched on the question that I wanted to ask right now, and this is also something that Ramsey has briefly mentioned previously, which is one of the techniques, strategies that has been used to demonize and repress those who are involved in the solidarity movement with Palestine. And I'm referring to the accusation of antisemitism, which is not new to Pan-Africans, and Black activists, because in the 1980s, when the Black organization, Black activists were denouncing the relationship between Israel and apartheid. So they designed that concept of Black anti-Semitism, to explain why Black activist organizations were denouncing the collusion between apartheid, South Africa, and Israel. And we also saw it right now. We're still seeing it, and we also saw it in your case that the Zionist diehards have been abusing, in fact, the accusation of anti-Semitism to discredit the struggle that we were involved in, you and others. So I was wondering if you could talk about how anti-Semitism has been weaponized against activists, students, and other people who are engaged in the solidarity movement with Palestine, like yourself. So how anti-Semitism has been weaponized to discredit and repress those like you have been expressing solidarity with people of Gaza and Palestine.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But I first want to say that there's like, what we've realized is that there's a hierarchy of racism here, right? And anti-Semitism becomes the racism of all racisms, right? And it becomes the beyond the pale racism, and you can't even anything that remotely resembles anti-Semitism, or even the mere claim of an anti-Semitic claim, means that you can now be repressed and you can now be shut down and cancelled. And that's not to say that anti-Semitism isn't real at the level of the individual. But I'm so sorry, I'll be honest with you, and I might get into trouble for this one. But in the Western world, anti-Semitism is not a material problem. I am so sorry. Do you get discriminated if you're Jewish at level of school? Are there rates of prison? Do you get disproportionate prison rates? No. Do you get rates of, are you stop and searched more because you're Jewish? Are you denied a job because you're Jewish in the West? No. If anything, it's a benefit in many of these places, right? So yes, there's prejudice, right? But the question becomes, where does power accrue? Because at the end of the day, look at the briefing that the government submitted. In my case, the government said that I created an not unsafe, an uncomfortable environment for Jewish students. In which world, there's not a more coddled demographic? I'm so sorry, because in which world can I marshal DHS, ICE, the FBI, the president, and the Secretary of State for not my safety, but for my comfort? I said, as a Black man, I don't know what it means to walk through this world being comfortable. I don't know. I don't walk through this world thinking that I'm just, I expect to be comfortable, because that's not how I live in this world. So I find it quite telling that, it's almost the reality has been so inverted that those who have state officials marshalling on their side and defending them are the people that can claim to be unsafe, unwelcome, and scared, right? And scared when again I said before, no one's losing their job for being pro-Israel. No one's losing their livelihoods. No one's being denied tenure. No one is being attacked in the same way, right? But people Palestinians people are being shot. We've had kids. Wadi was killed. We've had people being spat on. We've had all these levels of abuse for being pro-Palestinian. I mean, heck, like I'm in the UK right now because it was no longer safe for me being in the US, not for me committing a crime, but for me saying that, you know what, killing kids is wrong. Right. And it's insane to me that anti-Semitism, for me, I wrote this in a post, but anti-Semitism becomes a battering ram to destructively destroy all semblance of civic society. Right? Because we know once you invoke that, it becomes beyond the power and you can't touch. And I'll be honest with you, I am just so sick of it. Like I'm really, really sick of it. Like I'm sick of it. I'm at this point, I don't even engage with it, if I'm being honest with you, because again, like we can talk about hurt feelings once the genocide stops, and we can talk about hurt feelings when Gaza is rebuilt, and we can talk about these questions, how you feel. But right now, there's a material question of people being slaughtered daily, and that's what I'm going to put my energy in. I'm not going to put my energy in talking about how I just feel sad, or I feel something, right? Because at the end of the day, I said to somebody, I remember we had an event on campus, and this Cornell like deceptively kind of did a Muslim and Jewish event on campus, and like, to kind of show to the outside world, no, it's all this is a happy place on campus. There's no issues on campus. And I said to the guy, he said that when I see this is a Zionist student, he said to me, when I see pro-Palestinian protesters on campus, I feel scared. And I said to him, I'm so sorry, but like even your physiological impulses come from somewhere. They don't come from thin air. You are conditioned in certain ways. So, for example, the question needs to be: I gave the analogy. If I was in a park at late night with my hood on, listening to music, just relaxing and thinking, and a white man said, "When I see a black man wearing his hood, I feel scared." The question wouldn't be to Momodou stop wearing hoods. The question will be, what is it about your conditioning that when you see a black man, you feel scared? So the question becomes, what is it about your conditioning that when you hear the words free Palestine, you feel scared? Because do you think it's calling for your annihilation? Okay, let's interrogate that. But the fact that the conversation can be stopped by saying, I feel scared and I'm a Jewish person is for me, it is insanity. It really is insane to me.
Just to follow up on this, it's number one, I haven't heard anybody kind of dissect the issue in such a way, and I'm glad that you did. But you also mentioned something, something to the effect of we shouldn't be bothered by this. We should just move on and just remain committed to stopping the genocide in Gaza. That's the priority, as opposed to kind of veer off and engage in these kind of silly distractions. But they are not silly distractions. I mean, they are
Mhm,
being made to appear as if they are fundamental to this conversation. And they are,
mhm,
and I wrote and I spoke about this repeatedly in the past. And my advice is don't allow them to distract you, keep moving forward. But now we are in a situation where people are losing their jobs and careers and university degrees and diplomas. And there are hundreds, I mean, you know that, Momodou, there are hundreds of legal cases against anyone
mhm.
and everyone involved in this struggle. And a lot of these cases are branded as, these individuals are anti-Semitic. So we cannot pretend that it's not there.
Yeah,
What do you
yeah.
say? What do you say? How do we overcome this and yet remain committed to ending the genocide in Gaza?
No. I agree. I think I understand that. So I want to say, like, first and foremost, the work of like Jewish Voices for Peace, I think, is important, right? I think there is a work to be done to bring folks out of Zionism, which I think is important as well. But I think at the same time, we're burnt out, where we have limited resources at this time, right? Where we're struggling every day. We see massacres and slaughters. So I'm just thinking. I think again, it has to be case by case basis. I can't give a blanket ruling because again, I know that I've been I mean, they call me anti-Semitic all the time. I mean, mine goes even further. I told you I had the FBI looking for me. And they subpoenaed my social media looking for material support of terrorism. Right, I could have been in jail for 20 years, right? So or longer. So my point is that like they're going to gun after us anyway, and given that they're going to gun after us anyway, I think it's a scare tactic, right? Because people don't. I saw this on campus. So many young people who are careerists said to me point blank to my face, Momodou, we agree with you. We have to think about our career. We cannot have the anti-Semitic label on our on our kind of history. And I understand that. But what's happening, and I think what Zionists don't realize, is the continuation of invoking anti-Semitism in this way. What's happening is they're hollowing out the meaning of anti-Semitism, right? And I feel like this is going to backfire so badly on Zionists in the future. They don't even realize this. So what I would say concretely is, again, if you're waging this struggle again, I came out and just said that, I can attest that I condemn anti-Semitism. I have done that in the past. When I was suspended, so when I was facing deportation and ICE was looking for me, I had like over, I think maybe 100 Jewish Cornellians come out and write in my defense and say that, we've had personal experience with Momodou. He's never been racist to us. And that did a little bit, but fundamentally, my point is that, like, if you're going to, because you have to understand, again, I don't know how everyone feels about this, but the IHRA definition has made it so that 70% of what is constituted as anti-Semitism is just critique of Israel, right? So this is what I'm trying to say. We have to push past, because again, it cannot be racist to critique a state. It cannot. Like, we have to push past that. But yeah, I want to say to Ramsey, like, I really do like empathize and resonate with that, because I know people are losing their jobs for being called anti-Semitic, etc. And I know that's like, I hope they have the support, and we need to build our structures in place. We can tackle this as well. But we've seen they've tried, like, UK's alhamdulillah a bit different. The UK ruled that Zionism, it was like an employment tribunal case, but they ruled that Zionism is not a protected category and you can be anti-Zionist, right? But again, what happens now if Zionism becomes a protected category and then we cannot even critique Zionism anymore? Because that's a real reality. Does that mean we're all going to stop our activism? Right? We're not going to. So I think, yeah, so those are kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Momodou. I just wanted to build up on what you just said about some of your colleagues or fellow students being afraid of speaking out against the genocide because they fear for their academic or professional careers. So beyond those students, what is your advice to all those, including some of the people who will be watching this interview, who are really outraged, disgusted by what they're seeing, the first televised live on social media genocide in history, but still they would not speak out against it because they're so afraid. Thomas Sankara used to say that a slave who is not willing to fight for his freedom does not deserve our mercy. So what is your advice to all those people? And we don't want to sound judgmental. We understand, some of their fears, but what is your advice as an activist who was involved concretely and directly in the struggle? What is your advice to those who are afraid of losing some symbolic or material benefits for speaking the truth to power?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to tackle this question. And again, I not refrain, but everyone has to make a judgment call on their own lives, right? I know I can talk about my judgment call and why I did what I did, because two things. First and foremost, I believe in Allah, and so my fate is my fate, and I have tawakkul, reliance on God. Like, that's unshakable. I know. I always believe whatever happens, I'll be okay at the end of the day, no matter any of my hardships, right? And then secondly, my deeply held conviction that I believe Palestine is going to be free. So given that I believe it's going to be free, and it's a matter of when and not if, it wasn't even a question for me, right? But I understand everyone has different levels of precarity. I understand, and I recognize that, which is fine. But at the same, I say to people, a world in which 20,000 children can be killed with such impunity is a dress rehearsal of what's going to happen to us one day, right? So even if you're selfishly don't care about Palestinians, but a world in which this can happen is a world in which one day our future kids, generations and to come, will be subjected to this level of violence, right? So what we say about Palestine, when I say it's a litmus test, we're saying literally, what kind of world do you want to live in? And if you want to live in a world in which this can happen, and one day, because we know, again, the imperial boomerang, we know that, again, in times of crisis, again, liberalism will always side with fascism. This is a scary moment. this is an absolutely scary moment because, again, all these technologies and weapons that are being developed and being tested on Palestinians, do we not think it's going to come and be using us one day? Because again, we already know that we're heading to ecological catastrophe. We already know neoliberalism has no answers anymore for us. We already know that capitalism has exceeded and surpassed what it can offer us anymore. So what happens? I know on the left we always have this very cliche where it's socialism or barbarism, but it really is that thing. It really is. We need a new way to exist, or we're going to descend into barbarism. And I sincerely believe that. So I think I just hope that whoever's listening to this, that I beseech you and to think about the world in which you want to live in, because a world in which this can happen to Palestinians is no world worth saving at all, right? And the question becomes, it's a question of justice and what recourse to justice do we have going forward? So again, I'm not going to say everyone do what I did, because I assessed my situation, I have my beliefs, and I was comfortable with my decisions that I made. If anything, I have a sense of shame because I said to myself, we've done 18 months of protesting and genocide is still ongoing, right? But for me, and I would hope others, I would never tell people to make sacrifices, but I would say that we need more people to make sacrifices.
I was just talking about your earlier points about the racial component in this, and yeah, we've all seen the statements, made by top officials in various European countries. Well, the Ukrainians are white with blue eyes, and that's, I mean, it's as vulgar as real a description of that reality as it gets in this messed up world of ours. But then, okay. So this is, I have noticed that, I mean, I am from Gaza. I was born and raised in Gaza. I've lost more family members in Gaza than I have left. But then suddenly I'm discovering on social media that Gazans are more white than dark and brown. I mean, you have all of these images that are distributed by activists and solidarity people of the particularly highlighting the particularly fair-skinned Gazans. And then suddenly there are so many children with blue eyes, and which is kind of sad in many ways. Sad that the Palestinians themselves are trying to appeal to the West, saying, okay, if you don't care about our brown and black, at least care about our white. And the Western activist who is also promoting that notion, trying to kind of dig deeper into some sort of a, the racist but humanitarian component, I don't know how to describe it, of the Western society. On the other hand, we also see so much support pouring out for Palestine and Gaza coming from all ideological divides. I mean, I have seen right-wing, Trump supporters, extremely famous bloggers crying on their podcast over what's happening in Gaza. Naturally, we don't want to lose that crowd, and we cannot invest in a specific ideological school of thought. How do we make a compromise out of all of this? What is the global message we should have to enlarge in the circle of support for Palestine without compromising on the ideological and racial reality that exists in Palestine?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Actually, I think it's ironic, right? Because I always have this, just to kind of, I guess, add like an anecdote or something I'm confronted with constantly is, but Palestinians are anti-black. Why are you so invested in their struggle? And I'm just like, do you know Afro-Palestinians exist? Like, are you unaware that Afro-Palestinians exist? And first and foremost, solidarity isn't transactional. So that's never been that's something that is a tired rhetoric that I constantly battle and constantly have to engage with, unfortunately. But I think you're absolutely right, what I've seen, because unfortunately, we do live in a white supremacist world, and we do live in that there is an appeal, unfortunately, that hits home in certain ways that other racialized groups would not. But I think so far, what I've seen in terms of like without compromising and building a larger movement and enlarging the circle of support, I don't know. I think, again, this could be in the circles I'm in. So Ramsey, I mean, I would love for you to maybe you could tell me your own experience. But as I've had the same thing. I've seen people who would deem themselves apolitical, who knew nothing about Palestine before October the 7th, be some of the most pro-Palestinian people right now, who don't miss rallies anymore, who don't even deem themselves as political. So I've seen that time and time again, which for me indicates that I do think Zionism it's already lost the ideological battle in my eyes. It's just now it's just the material question now has to catch up. to the ideological. But I think what's happening, I think we are building a mass movement. We are, like, with all the repression that we've seen on campuses. Colombia is one of the worst places. Students are still showing up. Students' degrees are being withheld, and they're still showing up. And people, and the crowds are getting bigger. I mean, London last week, we had the official announcement was 500,000 people turned up on Nakba Day, right? On Nakba Day, and I don't know of any, but I don't know any time where there was a student movement in the United States which was on the wrong side of history and was not always also eventually successful as well. So for me, it's like, I think we have to carry on what we're doing, and I think the other stuff I won't say because I'm being recorded. No, I just said half jokingly, but I do feel like there is levels of what you were kind of intimating. What I would hope, what I would hate to see is the Palestinian struggle becomes another humanitarian liberal charity case, because Israelis can do that. The Israelis are like, Abu Mazen wants a Palestinian state by any means necessary. He doesn't care what the nature of the state is. He doesn't care what the state it will be. He doesn't care. He thinks, as long as you have a Palestinian state, even if it's in a state in which you have no standing army, you have no airport, you have no infrastructure and you have none of the entrappings which constitute modern statehood. As long as we can say it's a state, it doesn't matter. No, because Israelis can do that. They can, and it's like what Fanon would say, where they can put you in a place where they are responsible for feeding you, etc. They can give you that, but to actualize actual sovereignty, they don't want that. So I say that for me, where I'm out now is, and maybe I'm just a bit more militant, right? But I think, given my own experiences, it's not like I grew up, I just one day woke up and was a bit like, oh, radical. No. I've seen that we're dealing with sick people. I'm sorry to say, but we're dealing with, and I'm not someone who believes in people to be ontologically evil. I'm not saying that, right? But we're dealing with a people who literally, whose psychic health is reproduced by the blood of Palestinians. So for me, of Zionism, I'm cautioning movements and activism. There can be no space for liberal Zionism, left-wing Zionism, Marxist, if there's a Marxist Zionism, whatever kind of brand of Zionism is, there can be no compromise. I think we have to hold our line. We really have to hold our line, because what I don't want is this to become like a liberal charity case, and then we deal with it on those lines and forget, no, it's a question of settler colonial violence, colonialism, and obviously fundamental liberation as well.
Do you think there is enough awareness in the movement, Momodou, that because these are, these nuances are critical to what is going to happen after the genocide?
Yeah.
And we are already seeing Palestinians who are being misused. Okay, like, yeah, sure, we are centering Palestinians, but we are centering the wrong Palestinians, or the Palestinians who are not fully aware of these nuances. Do you feel like there is a growing awareness within the movement that, yeah, sure, we want the genocide to end, but we want this post-genocide world to be based on a different understanding of who the Palestinian is and what the Palestinian wants?
Absolutely, right. And I think people don't. This is a material question, because we know that there's a distinction materially between the 48ers, West Bank, and Gaza, right? Not to say, again, please, no one misunderstand me that I'm dividing Palestinians. I'm just saying materially, right? Because think about the West Bank. They have to go through checkpoints every day. Their source of livelihood. Like, it's not a mistake that the most radical elements come from Gaza. It's actually quite logical, right? It's a very logical question, because they're the most deprived, and they're the most subject to the heinous crimes of Israel in many ways. West Bank, we know people who work in West Bank sometimes have to work in, like, we know that the Israel government subsidizes certain people's salaries, for example, right, in certain places. And we know those who live in 48, we know that they lived in an apartheid state, but their relationship to Israel is very different, right? So I think it's like I remember the question, what was the film called that won the Oscar? No Man's Land. Right? No Other Land. No Other Land? No Other Land. And I was I was like, no, the first and foremost, the title, I hated it, because there is an other land. It's called Poland. And it's called, there's other places that are called, but I was frustrated, because I remember someone said to me, and again, I know this was very contentious, But I remember someone said, you have to understand, this film humanizes Palestinians. And I was really upset about that because I thought Palestinians have always been human. It's the Western liberal audiences who need to be humanized. You have lost your humanity and you need to be humanized. And that film humanizes you, not doesn't humanize the Palestinians, it humanizes you people. Which really frustrated me. But I said, question on the nuance. I think, as you said, like most movements, it's all going to be a line struggle, right? It's going to be a line struggle. But I can say I want to shout out Wall within our lifetime. I think they've been great at holding the line. PYM, I think, has been great, and PYM particularly, I'm very close to, and I think they've done a great job at, like, again, trying to hold the line within the diaspora, right? Because again, let's be honest, we're talking about a material question in Palestine. It's also a material question in the West. A lot of diaspora Arab kids grow up in the suburbs. They're middle class, right? Their aspirations are tied to the United States, even still. So I think, but I do say October 7th for me has been a watershed moment, and I think that I'm grateful that this nuance has not been condemned. I've not seen it. I'm sure it takes place, but in the big mass movements that I've seen, especially the ones that hold it down for Palestine consistently amongst, like, students or over in the diaspora more generally, I think they have been able to hold this nuance quite well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Momodou.
Yeah, you did talk about the ideological battle that the Zionists are losing, according to you, or have even lost. But we also seeing that Israel has become a place of pilgrimage for the far right in Europe and the West. The far right that is becoming increasingly popular. Like, we've seen the recent elections that they're gaining, popularity. But this is probably something that we can discuss on another podcast, because I've seen that we're running out of time. So I just wanted to ask a final question regarding to something that I have mentioned when we started the program, which is the book that you wrote on Malcolm X.
Thank you.
Yeah, very important character, very important anti-colonial leader whose 100th birthday we are celebrating. It was yesterday, I guess, the day you presented your book. May 19th. He was born May 19, 1925 in the US. So I just had a question about the significance of Malcolm X in the Pan-African solidarity with the people of Palestine. Because Malcolm visited Gaza in 1964, right? And a few days after he visited Gaza, he actually published a piece in the Egyptian Gazette in which he was denouncing, exposing Zionism as what it has always been, a settler colonial project based on the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. So I wanted to ask you, what is the significance of Malcolm X? How significant is his contribution to the long history of Pan-African solidarity with Palestine, and how it has influenced your own engagement with the people of Palestine?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I've often said that, Malcolm is like my inspiration. He's my muse. He's my interlocutor. He's someone I often think about, in moments when I'm going through issues or level of repression. I've always asked myself, what would Malcolm do in this situation? Because for me, he is my North Star, right? He is someone that when you think of sincerity embodied, I envisage Malcolm, right? When I think of the legacies, me being a Muslim, I think of the prophetic character. I see that embodied in Malcolm because he was sincere. He had a love for his people, hatred of injustice and oppression. He fought for justice no matter what the cost came to him, his and his family, and ultimately his life in the end. And he, again, someone being a Pan-African, he obviously throughout his life, as he develops as a thinker, you find he becomes more internationalist, right? He becomes more to a Pan-Africanist movement. He's with, Castro, he's with Nkrumah, he does his Africa tour. And I think it's also important that one of the last things that Malcolm wrote on the day he died was condemning and denouncing Zionism. Right, one of the last things he wrote on the day he died. And I think for me, he encapsulates, when we think of Pan-Africanism, people think of like, oh, which is a project just for Black people. But no, Pan-Africanism is a global liberatory struggle, right? Because I've always said that for me, Malcolm embodies and encapsulates the best of what I call the Black radical tradition, which is always a imminent critique of Western modernity and liberalism. Because again, when the in 1975, when the official UN declaration that Zionism is racism, and that was only overturned in 91 to bring Israel to the table during the Oslo Accords, it was Sekou Toure and Pan-Africanist leaders who led the charge to declare that Zionism is racism, because they said that we recognize this because it's happened to us. This is our shared legacy of colonialism, right? And this is what solidarity looks like. So for me, Malcolm embodies and encapsulates the best of the Black radical resistance tradition. And that is to be anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, and anti-Zionist.
I know that Buna promised that this is the last question, but I will bother you with with one last one, Momodou, just because also, I mean, I grew up being a big fan of Malcolm X, and I remember how excited I was when I was told that I needed glasses, not because I was worried my eyes were going bad, but at 16 years old in Gaza, I wanted to look like Malcolm X too. But of course, with time, you realize that Malcolm is far more complex than
Yeah,
the way he's being
yeah,
presented here
yeah,
in the US. And there was an excellent book also recommended by my friend Buna, The Dead Are Rising, that kind of
yeah. It's pain.
reintroduced Malcolm X in a different way. And I remember you said on his last day, he condemned Zionism. Indeed, you could see that kind of evolution that's happening to Malcolm's view of Pan-Africanism, but also of the anti-colonial, understanding of how he saw the world beyond the struggle within the United States. I wonder, we participated in that excellent conference, Buna, the Umuju conference, the Pan-Africa conference, and I noticed that most of these Pan-African authors and intellectuals and activists, how they are incorporating Palestine now so seamlessly into
Yeah,
their discourse, not as an
yeah.
issue of solidarity. Yeah, we need to. Gaza is really struggling. We feel bad about it, but they were talking about it as if it's part of their everyday struggle within
It's
their
us.
own
It's us.
community. How would Malcolm would have wanted to galvanize in this moment? And I hate to put you on the spot here. We are seeing a world that's changing. Geopolitically is shifting. New discourses are rising and others are dying, including
Yeah,
Zionism. How should
yeah,
Palestine become a rally cry, if you will, for
yeah.
this new world order within the global south?
No, no, Palestine is like, as I said, Palestine is the litmus test, and I keep saying this, right? And I think what happens to Palestine is of any importance for anybody who lives in the global South. And we've seen global South solidarity exponential. But to answer the question, I would never know what Malcolm would do, but I could only suspect that given we are not in the era of mass movements anymore, unfortunately, right? But there was a time of Marcus Garvey who amassed a movement of 1 million African Americans, right? We see there was a time of internationalism, which we saw on the streets of Harlem, right? And I would only hope that with someone of that stature and that someone ability to galvanize so many, that he would be able to instrumentalize a mass movement in denunciation of Zionism and take up material impact to reverse, or not reverse, but I guess to attack Zionism, basically. And I think, but it's tough, man, because again, there's days I'm like in my bed crying. There's days in my bed I'm like, I'm optimistic. I don't ever descend into nihilism. But it's very tough seeing the images that we see every day, right? I'm still a human being, but I do think what we're seeing is perhaps those moments in which Malcolm was alive during non-alignment movement, when there was South-South collaboration. We're seeing that re-emerge right now. And I think that is the only way we're going to see a free Palestine and a a world free from colonialism. And I think we are moving in that direction personally. Just a quick last point, and what gave me a bit of hope not many people know this, 'cause I didn't post this anywhere, but when I left America, I went to Canada. I was in Canada for a week, and then I went to Cuba because I felt like, it's always Cuba's the place where activists and people always go. And it was just so refreshing to be in a place where the question of Palestine is not even a question. It wasn't a question. It was like, of course we support Palestine. Of course, we support the right to resist. Of course, we're pro-Palestinian. One of the first, I was in Palestine. I was in Cuba, and I came across a mural, and the mural said that it's genocide, not war, with a hijabi person, clearly from Gaza. Right? I was greeted by a Afro-Cuban who heard about my case, and he fought in the Angolan liberation struggle. And he said to me, the first thing he said to me was, "You're safe here in Cuba." So I'm trying to say to people that it's not everyone can leave the West, but being in the West, you can think that we're not doing anything, or we're not changing anything, or the whole world is against us, or it can feel like that, right? Because the Western world has a lot of power. But as soon as you leave the West and you go to global South, we're not even having the discussions of like anti-Semitism or all these things. You're literally talking about, okay, we 100% support Palestine. That's it. And I think people need to go to those spaces as activists because it can reinvigorate your conviction.
Absolutely brilliant, and it's a great point to finish with. Momodou Taal, thank you very, very much for sharing your
Thank you
insight
both.
and perspectives with us today, and we wish you the very best in your studies, research, and
Thank you
career.
so much.
Uh,
Thank you so
and
much.
my friend Buna, thank you very much for co-hosting or allowing me to co-host this episode with you. You were supposed to be the main character here. To our audience, thank you for tuning in. As many of you know, direct engagement is crucial, so please like, share, comment, and follow to support our work. We look forward to our next episode of The Floodgate. Thank you.